What do you think is the most dangerous book ever written by an African? This book was so dangerous that the then president of the United States held a meeting to say the mere publishing of this book is a hostile act. The US cancelled $100 million deal with Ghana because the person who wrote the book was from Ghana. And three, the Intelligence Bureau of the State Department of the US did a research on this book and sent it to their embassies around the world so that their embassies will be mindful of the content of the book. What is this book? And why was it so dangerous that the US was taking actions to ensure that people take this book serious while publicly pretending that, oh, it's just another. Before we get into this, let me tell you who I am. My name is Enebi Tony. I'm a Ghanaian writer based in the US. My book is not dangerous. It's just about entertainment. I used to be an entertainment journalist in Ghana before moving to the US. And September in Ghana is celebrated as Nkrumah Memorial Month. And Dr. Kwame Nkrumah is the first president of Ghana. But he was more than just a president. He was also a prolific writer. So this week, we are going to talk about his most dangerous book. Next week, we'll talk about a different aspect of Nkrumah, totally unrelated to the book. But let's focus on the book. Nkrumah wrote his first book before he became president. That book was called Towards Colonial Freedom. And it was written in 1947. And it was written when he was living in London before he even came to Ghana to join the independence struggle. His second published book is called Ghana, the autobiography of Kwame Nkrumah, which came out in 1957. His third book, Africa Must Unite, also came out in 1963. And we'll talk about Africa Must Unite later. But it was his sixth book, Neo-Colonialism, the last stage of imperialism, that caught the attention of the United States. They started labeling Nkrumah as somebody who's trying to be the president of Africa. And this book came out in October 19. By February 1966, the US, through the CIA, helped to overthrow Kwame Nkrumah. And before that, they started punishing Ghana. And why was this book considered so dangerous? So, in Nkrumah's other books before this book came out, he had shared some of the struggles he's dealing with as president of Ghana. If you read Africa Must Unite, he talked about how when he took over as the first president of Ghana, he went into the castle expecting to see documents that the British government used when they were ruling over Ghana, and found out that the British had gone away with every document that pertained to Ghana, considered it classified. So as president, he had to start governing Ghana from scratch without any precedent to guide his decisions. And precedent is important because usually governance is a build-up. The president will do something, the next president will come and do something to advance what the first president was doing. The third president will come. That's how it's done everywhere. Even if publicly you see politicians criticizing each other, behind the scenes, there's always continuity in how governance happens all over the world. Even if they don't complete projects, there's some form of continuity, right? But Ghana didn't have continuity when Nkrumah took office because there was nothing to continue. His sixth book, however, he stopped looking in the past, started focusing on what was considered the present in 1965 and the future. And if you read Neo-Colonialism today, it will read like Nkrumah was a prophet. But he wasn't a prophet. He was just discussing things which were happening in Africa in 1957 that today in 2025 are still happening. And what are some of those things? I'll focus on chapter 4 of the book. The chapter 4 of the book is called Monopoly, Capitalism, and American Dollar. And in this chapter and in around the book, he talked about the fact that the US had inherited the mantle of imperialism from the Europeans. So the US is now the country implementing imperialist tactics around the world. And he tried to explain how the US imperialist tactics is different from the European imperialist tactics. So European imperialist tactics was that Europeans were living in Africa and colonizing Africa. That's not what the US was doing. The US was using foreign investment and aid as tools of exploitation and control. And he said the US dollar was a tool of control. What did he mean by this? Around this time, the US dollar had been accepted as the world currency. And Nkrumah acknowledged that this started from the World War II. Right? So from World War II, the US was becoming the, for want of a better word, daddy of the world. And Daddy Sam, or Uncle Sam, was intended to use their power around the world for good and to protect the world from extremists like Hitler and the rest. But Nkrumah was saying that the US is turning around to use their power to control other countries in the world, and specifically in Africa, the US was using their power in Africa to suppress Africans. He mentioned how the US financial institutions were doing that, and he gave different examples, right? And he mentioned specifically how the US was using institutions like the Peace Corps to implement espionage tactics in Africa. What is the Peace Corps? So the Peace Corps was set up in 1961 by President Kennedy of the US, JFK. And JFK's intention for setting up the Peace Corps was to clean up Americans' image around the world. When JFK set up Peace Corps through executive order, he said the CIA would not be allowed to use the Peace Corps for espionage. And he said he was going to ensure that the CIA doesn't infiltrate the Peace Corps. He was very, very mindful of that. Why would JFK, the president of the US, go out of his way to say the CIA would not be allowed to use Peace Corps to spy on other countries? This is because, one, the CIA was using agencies around the world, the US agencies around the world, to spy on countries. And two, countries had getting notice of the fact that the CIA is doing this. And three, the US was battling bad reputation at this point. And President Kennedy thought that we need to clean up our image around the world and stop doing things that people think we are doing. Wink, wink, we are not doing it. AKA, we are doing it, but we will stop. And President Nkrumah was saying that the US didn't stop. They were actually using Peace Corps to do this. I don't want to link the JFK assassination Peace Corps conversation. I don't want to do that. I'm not a conspiracy theorist, even though I enjoy conspiracy theories every now and then. So when Nkrumah was criticizing the US and what the US was doing around the world, he also laid a blueprint of how Africa can overcome the US impending takeover of African resources. This is what was considered dangerous. Monopolistic capitalism, in my opinion, is not capitalism. I am a student of Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, but I'm also a capitalist. And I believe that capitalism, if done right, helps to uplift everybody. But this is not what the US was doing. They were using capitalism as a tool to achieve monopoly around the world, which actually the US has since admitted. People like Peter Thiel, who is one of the founding fathers of Facebook and other entities, has a book called, I think, 1 to 0. And in that book, he said, if you have competition, you are not winning, you need to be a monopoly in your sphere of market. So the US has since admitted to what Nkrumah was criticizing. But in 1965, the Cold War was going on. So the US and the USSR were battling for control of the world. The USSR have socialist leanings, the US have capitalist leaning. But Nkrumah was saying that US capitalist leanings are not really capitalists, they are monopoly in disguise. And this is what was considered dangerous. Why was this considered dangerous? You know why? He was touching their money. The Americans care about two things, their image and their money. And so when Kwame Nkrumah was exposing their tactics and criticizing their ways of making money, he became a target. And the US went out of their way to show it. Shortly after the book came out, the US government started criticizing the book. I think it was the Deputy State Secretary who said the book was considered a hostile act from a friendly country. Why would the president of Ghana, somebody who US considers friend, go out of his way to say something like this about the US? What did he say? He just said, you guys are making money. So why are people angry? He said you're making money. And the US even went further. At this point, because the world price of cocoa was plummeting, Ghana was facing economic issues. So Ghana and the US were in the negotiations to get some $100 million in the form of aid and other supplies to Ghana. The US canceled it. The New York Times, the American newspaper, published an article saying that the cancellation of the $100 million aid is because Kwame Nkrumah wrote the book criticizing the US. The US government denied it, but the US government instructed their embassies in Africa to tell African leaders that what happened to Nkrumah can happen to them. So publicly, the US was downplaying the book, but privately, they were telling people that if you write a book like this, you go see your son. And what happened after? Within a month after the book came out, when the deal was cancelled, the US started reaching out to Nkrumah's opposition in Ghana. So here's the thing. As of February 1965, there have been already plans to overthrow Nkrumah. So people have been trying to overthrow Nkrumah. I think even started before that, right? People have been trying to overthrow Nkrumah for years. And the US knew about attempts to overthrow Nkrumah, even though they didn't tell Nkrumah about it. But after the Nkrumah book came out, the US reached out to the people who were trying to overthrow Nkrumah to ask them, yo, this thing you are trying to do you need my help? It's like, you know, somebody is going to steal $100 million from the bank, but they have a pistol and you have AK-47. So you tell them, yo, the pistol, you can only shoot one person at a time. To be able to rob a bank, you need bigger ammunitions. And I'm going to supply you with bigger ammunitions. And so that is how the US CIA became involved in the overthrow of it. The CIA like to take credit for the overthrow of Nkrumah. But I don't think that the overthrow of Nkrumah was CIA's idea. But when Nkrumah wrote the book, they went and looked for the people who had ideas of overthrowing Nkrumah and empowered them. So when I say Nkrumah's Neo-Colonialism is the most dangerous book ever written. Three things support my theory. Number one, Ghana suffered from the US because our president wrote the book. Two, Nkrumah was overthrown because he wrote the book. And three, which is the most important thing, the US started destroying Nkrumah's image around the world. They started saying that Nkrumah is trying to be the president of Africa. Nkrumah is trying to set up the United States of Africa so that he can be president. Why did the US think that Nkrumah was trying to set up the United States of Africa? Because Nkrumah was able to figure out how the US was able to become a superpower. So, if Nkrumah has been able to figure out how the US was able to become a superpower, which Numbers is a big part of, then he can implement those strategies. That is why the US started putting it out there that Nkrumah is trying to be the president of Africa. And so they made him lose his political power, and then Nkrumah ended up being in exile till he passed away. You feel? And I said we are going to talk about Africa Must Unite. It's funny that the title of that book is Africa Must Unite, and the US didn't accuse him of trying to be the president of Africa. But when he criticized the US, then they started accusing him of that. I just wanted to point out little known stories about the history of Ghana. Next week, we'll talk about another aspect of the history of Dr. Kwame Nkrumah. Subscribe to this channel if you are interested in this type of conversation. And I also have other videos talking about current affairs if you are interested in that too.